Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Infinite Potential of Being Human podcast. I'm excited for today's episode. Um, Many of you have heard me speak about my training and my teacher, David Norris, who has been training me for the last 7.5 years, but really been a teacher to me for the last 15. It feels like a lifetime. And I'm excited to be able to sit with David here today and have him share with you so much of what he has taught me and he teaches and where he sees the world from. And really, everything that I have taught here in this podcast, I have learned from him. So, welcome to the podcast, David. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm fine, and thank you for the invitation.
So, really, I want to begin by letting everybody get a feel and an insight of who you are and why you do what you do, how you even ended up where you are. So, can you share with us, firstly, what is it that you do?
Right. I lead programs. Some programs are very large. In the past, I've led programs up to several hundreds of people. Sometimes they're middle sized, like small groups, executive teams, and sometimes they're one to one. But I consider all of that a difference in size, but they're all programs. So that's what I do. I lead programs. And the purpose of the program, I always look to see how I'm going to say it at any given time because I'm always trying to refine it better for myself. The intention of the programs is for people to have a new relationship to who they think they are, out of which comes a new possibility for living. That's as simple as I can say it.
Right. And how and why did you end up in this body of work?
I started out my work life as an adult in education. I was an assistant professor. Well, first I was a preceptor at Columbia College in New York. And then I got my first assistant professorship. I got an assistant professorship at CCNY, City College of New York. And I was an assistant professor for a number of years. And I discovered some things about that. I discovered that I love education. I loved being a teacher. I just didn't like universities. That's me. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with universities. I just found them too political, and I found myself getting more and more drawn into the politics of the department in which I worked, which was English and comparative literature. After a few years of being an assistant professor, I left the university and joined an organization because I had done a program in San Francisco when I was there visiting a friend. It was, at the time, it was called the EST training, and it was a doorway into another level of consciousness. I don't know how else to say it. And it opened up the world for me in a very new and unfamiliar way. A few years later, I EST came to New York. It was very small in 1971 when I first encountered it. And a few years later, it came to New York where I was living. And I began to participate, first as an assistant, and then I was invited to come on staff. In fact, I became the first center manager of the New York Center for the EST organization. And to make a long story short, over the following years, then I was invited to come to New York, to San Francisco, and eventually invited to be trained to be one of the trainers, the S trainers, and I became an S trainer. That's when I really went deeper and deeper into this universe that had opened up for me. And that's where I learned the basics of the craft of working with other human beings in the particular ontological methodology that I was introduced to. I stayed with that organization, S, which later became Landmark Education, for 20 years. And during that time, I had the opportunity to travel all over the world, all of North America, United States and Canada, a lot of Western Europe, India, Australia, parts of the Middle East. And I encountered so many different cultures, and most importantly, I encountered human being. After 10 years of leading, it went beyond simply interacting with individuals. Yes, it was always that. It has to be, because you're talking to a person. But it began to have a different dimension to it as well. It was like a slice of humanity in a course room every weekend. And I was leading 3 weekends a month.
Wow.
And for 13 years. And I was in a different location every weekend, literally. And I was flying from Frankfurt to San Francisco to New York to Toronto to London, constantly traveling. And it was exhausting, but it was also a wonderful privilege. And throughout that whole time, I considered myself to be an educator, even though I was officially a seminar leader. I stayed with that organization for 20 years, and then it was time to move on. Not because the work lost its luster for me, it never did, but because the hotels and the airplanes did, I think. And so then I became a management consultant with 2 partners in Germany. In the meantime, I'd moved from the United States, where I had a home in San Francisco, and I moved to Germany. And people often ask me, why did you wind up in Germany? And I said, a woman. What had happened was that Landmark had asked me to move to Europe to be the chief forum leader. By that point, it was called the Forum, no longer the S training, to be the chief forum leader in Europe. And so I did. And they left it up to me where in Europe I would be based. And so I had met Brigitte about 2 years before, and we kind of began a relationship, which was very much long distance given how I lived. But here was an opportunity to make it not so long distance. And so I did. And I based myself in this little village in the Black Forest, which doesn't matter anymore where you live because it's all on internet and airplanes. And there's an international airport in Basel, an hour away from where I live. So I lived here and did that for a while. And then, as I say, I left Landmark, became a management consultant. 2 people approached me and said they had met me and would I be interested in joining them. They wanted to start a management consulting company. So I did, and we were together for 5 years, and I was a management consultant for 5 years, and I did what I had learned to do, only in the in the business world. One of my partners was a brilliant salesman, and he could sell snow to Eskimos, and he sold our programs. The other of my partners was a woman who had been the human resources director for Audi Automobile, and so she knew everybody in the business world in Germany. And I was the one who was supposed to be responsible for program development and design. And so it was a good partnership because we brought complementing strengths to each other, and we were quite successful. But after about 5 years, it felt like we needed to go our separate ways because we really wanted different things. So we did. And then I became a one-man show and started a coaching practice, which I continue to this day. But throughout that entire time, I always considered and still do consider myself an educator. It's just the venue kept changing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the coherent thread
Mm-hmm.
of at least how I would describe my work life.
Right. So what I find it so interesting that you call yourself an educator. And in fact, when I really think about it, that is exactly what you're doing. But well, there's two questions. What is it that you are educating the human beings that you work with in? And what is it about this form of education that inspires you to keep doing it today?
The reason one of the reasons I didn't feel comfortable in the academic world at the university, I enjoyed it as a student. It was wonderful as a student, but as a professor, I don't know, there's something about it that didn't quite fit for me. One of the reasons it didn't quite fit for me was you could go on teaching whatever you were teaching for centuries, and it wouldn't matter whether it really worked or not in the real world, as long as it was rationally coherent and as long as students kept showing up at your courses. It was fine to do that. What I missed was a real world component. Is what I'm saying actually, does it have relevance and impact in the real everyday world for people? And I found that real world relevance when coaching people, because when you're coaching people, either the interactions you're having with people makes it a little bit easier for them to relate to their wife or husband or children, or a little bit easier to start that business, or a little bit easier to actually live their lives. And you find out pretty quickly if what you're doing has real world impact or if it's merely theoretically interesting. So to come back now to your question, what is it I'm teaching? That's a good question, and it's the right question. I guess what I'm teaching is, what does it mean to be a human being, and what's possible?
Mm.
It sounds so simplistic when I say it that way, but that's really what it boils down to, with the understanding that that conversation needs to have real world impact. Otherwise, it's merely theoretically interesting, which isn't bad. I have nothing against theory. But theory without measurable impact in the real world, I find something missing.
Right. And what does it mean to be a human being? I mean, what I hear in what you say is something that I see as a difficulty in continued in the world today. I have also come up against is, um, I was speaking about this morning with my partner. We are at a time on the planet where there's more answers being offered than ever before to people's problems. And there are more people than ever before, it seems, consuming the answers to those problems. And yet, simultaneously, our problems seem to be getting worse. Meaning that whatever theoretical information, whatever information is being consumed or content that is being consumed, doesn't yet seem to be sufficient enough to make a shift in our real world,
Right,
the way that we live in the world.
right. Yes, I agree. And I have an answer to why I think that is. And it might sound simplistic at first, but I ask you and your listeners to try to listen to the wholeness of what I'm going to say. I think the difference is, if you're consuming answers, and I think most people who are looking for answers are looking for them as consumers. If you're consuming answers, you're dealing with possible solutions to the difficulties you're addressing in your life. You're dealing with it as content. Like, I have this issue or these issues, and what information do you have for me, Or what strategies can you offer me to deal better with these difficulties? Uh, that information, those strategies are perceived by people as content, like answers to questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think no answer, no matter how brilliant, and there are many brilliant answers on the market today, but none of those answers are going to make the difference that people are looking for because they're on the content level. It's kind of within the content of my life, there's difficulties and there's possible solutions, but they're both in the same level. And that, of course, brings to mind supposedly Einstein's famous quote, you can't solve the problems at the same level that with solutions that come from the same level at which the problems were created. Mm. And the minute you start talking about a shift in levels, you're talking about context as opposed to content. Mm-hmm. And that to me is the missing ingredient. Mm-hmm. All those answers that people are finding and consuming, and many of which are good answers, nothing wrong with them, but they are applied as content to address more content, positive content to address negative content, as opposed to people being educated, and now I come back to my role as an educator, as opposed to people being educated to be adept with context. And I think that's the missing ingredient. It's the context from which you apply your answers that makes the difference, that has the power, not the content. No matter how brilliant the content may be, if you're not capable of creating a context larger than the problem you're addressing, like a different dimension, then you're just using content to deal with content. And it's insufficiently powerful, no matter how brilliant it may be. Where the real power lies is in the context from which you come to the issue you're facing. And that's basically what I try to teach people, is how to be adept at creating context. First of all, being responsible for the context from which you're currently creating, whether you realize it or not. And then once you've made the invisible visible, the context from which you're operating visible, then you can be responsible for it. And as soon as you can be responsible for the context from which you currently are living and have been living, which gives you the problems you're dealing with, once you can do that, then you begin to be able to consider the possibility of creating new contexts from which to come to address the issues you're dealing with. And that's really the kind of education that I like to think I'm offering. Mm-hmm. And that may be the answer to a question you kind of asked, but maybe haven't yet, and that is, what do I think a human being is? Well, one of the things a human being is a creature capable of creating context. Mm. And for the most part doesn't know that.
Right. Well, that leads me to the next question. In all the people that you've worked with, which are many, and across many different landscapes of the planet, you flew from Frankfurt to San Francisco. I know you've worked in India and Colombia, and you've even worked in high security prisons. You've worked with many, many different human beings from all walks of life.
Yes.
And in relation to the conversation around context, what have you seen and learned consistent in all the human beings that you have worked with in order to bring your education?
That every human being who wants to is capable of accessing the power to create context. I have worked with highly intelligent scientists, but I've also worked with illiterate men in maximum security prisons. And they were all capable of accessing the power to create context.
Right. Did they know that?
Not when we started. They didn't know what I was talking about.
Right.
But that's the fun of leading this.
Yes. So, can you speak to my listeners about context? What is context? And why don't we know that we are creating it?
Right. First, what is context? Context is itself not visible. You can't see a context. You can only see from a context. So, context, you can't see context, but it gives you the appearing of a world that you do see.
Right.
So, whatever world is appearing to you at any given moment is appearing within a context from which you're looking. But for the most part, you're not aware that you're looking from that context, which is giving you the appearing of the world. And then, of course, your actions are correlated with the way the world appears. Two different people looking at the same situation, for one of them, that situation may appear frightening. Another person looking at the same situation, for that person, the world might appear exciting. In the bloodstream, the chemicals for excitement and fear are the same chemicals. The only thing different is the interpretation, which is given by the context. Now, why does one person see from this context and another from that one? Well, because they have different histories, different personal experiences, different families, maybe different cultures, different generations. Whatever the differences may be, it led to that person seeing the world from that context. But then we think the way the world appears is the way it is. In other words, we kind of cement that context in place as if, because we're not aware that it's where we're looking from. You can't see where you're looking from. You can't ever turn around fast enough to see your own eyes. You can only see what you're looking at, and it isn't at first obvious that where you're looking, what you're looking at is given by where you're looking from.
Yes.
Which is how come, by the way, and where people are looking from is something from their own past history, which is where context lives. And so it's the past that we are looking from, giving us the appearing of the present. And so we wind up stepping one step after the other we step forward into the appearing of the past in different forms and wonder why the patterns in our life keep repeating. It's because of where we're living from. We're living from the past, so we keep living in the various versions of the past given by where we're looking from. And that vicious circle is what people live in without realizing that's what they're living in. And breaking that vicious circle is one of the hallmarks of this particular kind of education. You know, what is a human being and what is possible? But first you have to recognize where you are before you can consider other possibilities.
Right. And is it in all human beings that the way the world appears is given by the context from which we see?
I've never met an exception, and I
Right.
have met lots of people in lots of life situations.
Right. So it is part of
Being human.
being human
Yes.
and predominantly a blind spot.
It is a blind spot because we don't realize that we are the creators of the context which gives us the appearing of the world, and then our actions are correlated with that appearing. I use the example of a frightening situation and an exciting situation. For the person for whom it is frightening, they're probably going to interact less effectively, more awkwardly with the situation than the person would for whom it is exciting. Our actions are correlated with the way the world appears, and the way the world appears is given by where we're looking from, and where we're looking from is a context derived from some past experience in our own history, our
Yes.
own personal history.
Yes. Now, even, I mean, I teach this, you've taught me how to teach this, and even hearing you now, it's still very, very confronting to let this in, that the world that we wake up into every day not just as David or Nikki or some of us, but as human beings,
Yes.
is appearing from where we are seeing from.
Yes.
That we are not separate from the world that appears to us.
Exactly. It is confronting, and that's why it takes several days as opposed to half an hour or an afternoon. It's a longer conversation because we have to go slowly and raise the gradient to the point where the confrontation is worth it, is experienced as more valuable than the fear.
Yes. Now, I'm interested by something you said right at the beginning. You said when you first did your first program in similar lines of work, education, it opened up worlds for you in
Yes.
ways you had never experienced. Something along those lines were your words. Can you speak more about that? What do you mean by that?
Well, you have to remember, I did my very first transformational program in 1971.
Hmm.
I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I thought it was like many people who come to our programs, your programs. I thought it was going to be an improvement in in what I called me and my life. And it wasn't an improvement. It blew it all up.
This is the point to which I want to cover.
What does
Most
it
people
mean?
are coming in wanting, without maybe even
Yeah,
realizing it, wanting an improvement to the life they already have.
right, exactly. Which is legitimate. There's nothing wrong with that, except it's not really what they want. It's what they think they want or what they think is possible. So let me embellish on that. What do I mean by that? I think I said towards the beginning of this conversation that what I'm interested in is educating people in discovering who they really are.
Who they think they are, you said.
Well, first you have to find out who you really are. You have to first overcome who you think you are.
Yes.
Um, and
And sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah,
who you think you are is giving you the appearing of the world you've got.
correct.
Just needed to make that clear for our listeners.
Of
There's no
course.
separation, meaning the problems from which one is struggling with is in correlation to who they think they are, giving them the world they get.
Right. It's knowing yourself as the main character of a story.
Mhm.
And people use the word story now all the time. Unfortunately, I hear people using that word in a pejorative sense, like there's something wrong with, oh, you're just in your story.
Yes.
And that's the wrong, I think, the wrong way to look at it. You can't not be in a story because your perception of reality, which includes yourself in reality, is a conversation you're having with yourself. So you're always telling yourself a story. And there's nothing wrong with that. The only question is it a story that you're trapped in and have been for quite some time with a predictable plot line to it? Or does it evolve and grow and develop and offer you new horizons? Um, so the storiness of one's life is not really a problem. It's only when that's the what you think the limit of what's possible is to live in a story. And if you think that, then the whole point of life is to have a happy end to your story. And that's what people are doing, and that's why they come to programs to look for maybe I've got some information or a new strategy or a new way of looking at things or a new theory that will allow them to improve the story so it's got a happy ending. But and here's where we return to your point about what did I get at my first program. See, I just like everybody else, I came to the program looking for what would make my life, my story, go better.
But
And
hold on. You didn't know you were coming in what would
no,
make my story better. You
no,
just thought it was your life.
exactly. I wanted to make my life get better, but I didn't realize what I meant by that was improve the circumstances.
Right.
And what I discovered was it didn't make my life get better. It blew up who I thought I was.
Hmm.
And who I thought I was the main character of that story. And for a little while, I lived outside of storyness, not recognizing exactly who it was that was who I was being because it was so different. It just felt easier and much more gracious, more spacious. So people come for improvements in their identity, and what they discover is the possibility of being free of their identity.
Mm.
Now, you cannot function without an identity, so nobody should be concerned that you won't have one when you leave the program. You'll have a different relationship to your identity. You cannot function in three-dimensional reality without a body-mind sensory apparatus, and with that comes a way of being, an identity. That's not an issue. You had one before, you'll have one after. The real issue is how tightly wrapped up and identified are you with that construct, with that main character. The way I like to say it is, can you wear the garment more loosely? Because identity is a garment one wears, or it's a tight sweater. It's either a summer dress or a tight sweater. And each of those ways will give you different ways of living your life. A looser relationship to your own identity allows you to be more fluid as you interact with the appearing of your life, and allows you more access to knowing yourself as the creator of the context which shapes that appearing. I hope that makes sense and doesn't sound too abstract and woo-woo.
No, it doesn't. In fact, I'm glad you are going here because, when you come in and you say you're an educator, most people will have some kind of already known idea of what education is based on what we've
Yes,
been taught.
yes,
And really, I want and I need you to go to where you're going because this is a form of education, but not really like any kind of education that
right.
most human beings relate to as education. It's the education on their entire relationship to being a human being and the reality that we get.
The word education comes from the Latin to draw out of, to draw out. When I went to school, it wasn't about drawing anything out of me, it was about pushing stuff into me,
Yes.
acquiring information so I could pass the test, which was what schooling was presented to me as, what education was, learning a lot of information. And it was sold to me by saying this was stuff you needed to know to be successful in life. And I, like most people, bought it. It was much, much later that I realized what education could be, drawing out from human beings a power that is innate in all of us, although for most of us invisible,
Yes.
but is there like a possibility.
Yes.
That's what I mean by education.
A power that is innate in all of us, but invisible until it's not
Until
invisible.
it's not, exactly.
Until it's not. Now, I mean, that's actually why I called this podcast The Infinite Potential of Being Human, because
Yes,
the power is innate in all of us because we are human beings. We are designed in a particular way currently.
right.
Now, I'm curious, just because, how often do I get to sit with someone that's been around for a while and has done this for many, many, many years? What, 50, almost 60? You say 50 almost every year, but I know
It's a little over 50 now, maybe 51, 52, something like that.
Okay, so you've been working with people in this form of education for a little over than 50 years. That's a long time,
Right,
and that's a lot of people.
right.
I'm curious, what is the difference that you are seeing today
Ah,
in in the in the way in which human beings received this education,
right,
maybe in the early 70s when you first started,
right,
to today?
right.
Seeing
Oh,
change.
there's a very big change. In the 70s, when I started, actually the late 70s that I actually started working with people. Um, People were like encased in concrete, and it took almost having to insult people. And I confess, the S training, we used insulting people as a device to get their attention.
Right.
And it was
Create activation.
well, it wasn't intended to create activation. It was intended to get their attention.
Right.
Because they couldn't hear what you were saying because people were encased in, I guess, their story, but really cemented in.
Right.
Years later, I'd say by the late 80s, early 90s for sure, the audiences were different. That the cementedness, the concrete, was no longer there. It was easier to get people's attention. It was no longer appropriate to insult them to catch their attention.
Mm-hmm.
You could begin talking to them. And thank goodness, because I never was comfortable with all that stuff we had to do to just get people's attention, because they were listening for information. And to get people to stop listening for information was almost impossible in the late 70s, because it's like that's where people were. We asked what was the difference. The difference was people were being more open to the possibility of context, of the invisible. That was not quite so solid. People were not so solid anymore. There was more fluidity in people's listening. A little bit more. Now, I don't want to get too dramatic with it, but a little bit more. And I find that today even more so. 50 years later, it's night and day talking to people. Now you can just talk to people. You don't have to spend the first day just getting their attention so that you can talk to them.
Right.
That's the biggest difference.
So there is something shifting.
Yes.
In our relationship to who we think we are.
Correct.
I was going to say on a species level, but we only really speak to the ones who come to us. So
right.
In the conversations and the programs that we are having this conversation,
right.
There is something maturing.
I think so.
Right. So there is a shift that's happening.
Yes.
What do you think that shift is?
Well, a lot of people are talking about it today, so this is not unique to us. I mean, you can't go on the internet without running into 2 or 3 podcasts about the awakening. That's the word that is often used. People are waking up. There's a transition happening. A lot of people talk about that. So this is certainly not unique to us in this conversation. And so many people are talking about it because so many people are noticing it.
Yes.
So first, the most important thing to say is, yes, it's really happening. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen someday. We're in the middle of it right now. It's happening.
Yes.
In the middle. It's causing a lot of stress in the world. People are very under stress because at the same time that something new is emerging, something old is collapsing.
Yes.
And so the transition we find ourselves in is a transition in which the old is breaking apart, and I think almost everybody can see that, whether it's the economic market, the financial markets or the economies, or it is the increased emotional stress that people feel, or here's where it shows up most clearly. The societal institutions of countries in the West. I don't know enough about countries outside of the West because I don't travel as much as I used to. But in the West, social institutions are breaking apart and have lost their credibility. Who trusts politicians? Who trusts the business world? Who trusts academia. I mean, not long ago there was this big revelation about how many scientific papers were based on lies, and scientists were publishing stuff just to keep their grant money. Academia has lost its credibility. Religion has lost its credibility. I mean, all religions. I'm not talking about spirituality, and that's a distinction that a lot of people make these days between organized religion and spirituality. That's certainly not new. But organized religion has lost its credibility, and we can go on and on. The social institutions have lost their credibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a sign of the collapse that we're in the middle of. So the old is collapsing. The new is barely visible. It's just maybe there's some green shoots beginning to show themselves. And so we find ourselves somewhere in between right now, not knowing what to hold on to, what to trust, what to believe in. The United States, I'm an American, so I know a lot. I try to follow the news in America as well as in Europe. Nobody trusts the news anymore. Which news do you listen to? It wasn't so long ago that Kellyanne Conway talked about alternative facts. So it's nothing is solid nothing is solidly trustworthy anymore. There's no place to stand. So that's where we find ourselves right now. I've lost the thread of the question.
No. It's exactly where I think is the right place to be, because it allows me to come back to a point, and this is really for the listeners, that the one that we wake up into every day
Right.
is in correlation to the world that appears to us. And
Right.
of course, when we start to question who we think we are and who we thought we just were,
Right.
that we wake up into every day, of course, the way that our reality appears starts to become less fixed.
Exactly.
It becomes malleable.
Right.
And now that is on an individual level, which is
Right.
where we started the conversation on. But if enough individuals are having that inquiry, are in that inquiry, of course, that has an impact to the way reality appears. So things that seem to be so fixed and just the way it is on a collective level, systems that you spoke about, are now appearing questionable.
Right.
Right. So what's happening individually is also happening collectively.
Exactly. My identity as an American or a German or whatever country is becoming more fluid. Which kind of an American? Are you an American who believes this, or are you an American who believes that? The identity of American is getting wobbly, and the same thing is happening in German. I mean, now there's nothing wrong with having different political opinions. All that's very good, but it's now the whole process of dialogue amongst the differences is becoming questionable.
Yes.
And it's breaking down. And that's reflected in who do I think I am? That's also becoming questionable, because who I always thought I was the main character of this story, and my life was about doing everything I could to get to the happy end. But if that no longer seems quite so credible, then what do I hold on to? What do I trust? And that's causing a lot of stress right now, and
Yes.
very understandably. And that's the period we live in right now, which, if you are sufficiently conscious, is a very exciting time to be alive. If you are not sufficiently conscious, it's a terrifying time to be alive.
Yes, and how that may be expressed right now, really for the listeners, is increased levels of anxiety, panic, fear.
Uncertainty, confusion.
uncertainty, confusion, even more grippings of control, finding yourselves going even deeper into patterns to try to control and hold on to something, like your mind feeling like it's attacking you even.
Yes.
That is how it may be experienced by those who are listening to this
Right.
conversation.
Right.
And then, of course, what's wrong with me? There must be something wrong with me,
Right.
which makes
There's
you go even more into trying to control and survive the whole thing,
Well, we start off thinking there's something wrong with them
right?
out there, them. But then after a while, like for example, men, there's something wrong with men. And so you go to a different partner and a different partner and a different partner. And after a while, you notice the only common denominator in all of your relationships is you. So then you start wondering, what's wrong with me? How come I keep picking those kind of men? Or how come I keep winding up in that situation? Or how come no matter how many times I change my job, I always wind up with the same boss, just with a different face? And so I begin to lose trust in my own ability to navigate my life. What can I trust? And that brings you to a crisis. And as I think many people know, a crisis can be debilitating, paralyzing, or it can be a healing crisis. It can be exactly what you need to shake everything that you thought was fixed loose, allowing you to discover something beyond what you thought was possible.
Yes. You've used that term with me before, and I agree with you. But many may not have heard that before. That what feels like a crisis is a healing crisis, potentially,
Can be.
if you want to have a relationship with it from that place.
Yes.
That the crisis that one finds themselves in may be whatever you were holding, all the stuff that you used to do that used to work in your relationships now no longer is working, or with your work, or with your relationship to money, or with your relationship to your health.
Right.
It's something is no longer working,
Right.
and you feel like a crisis.
Yes.
And that is a crux point
Yes.
to which you can either continue to collapse,
Right.
or it can allow you to question
Right.
questions you haven't asked before.
Right.
Now, what may be new for the listeners, or maybe not, is that what they are struggling with individually, which maybe they didn't know that is not just them,
Right.
but that there also seems to be, almost mirroring it identically, a crisis happening collectively, which
Right.
also could be a healing crisis if we want
Yes.
it to be.
And I think it is.
Yes. Right. Well, then that brings me to a slightly change of tack, but I think it's also connected. In the conversations that I have with a lot of people today, and certainly in the way that people respond to our episodes, topics that I teach about, people are really struggling in relationships. It seems to be a place of great pain.
Yes.
And I've even heard people say, why are relationships getting worse? My parents were married for 40 years and now
Right.
people can barely stay together for 9 months.
Right.
I'd love to talk about this.
Sure.
What is happening in relationships?
That's a great question. And it reverberates through so many levels. I have come to think over these 50 years of thinking about what I'm doing, I have come to think that there's one key distinction at the bottom of all other distinctions. There's one key distinction which is at the root of all of the work we do. And that distinction is the distinction between inside and outside. Me in here and world out there. We have that as a separation, that me is separate from world. That is such a fundamental. I mean, what could be more fundamental than thinking that there is a someone right here and not over there? And over there, out there, is a world, and the world is filled with lots of things and lots of someones.
Yes.
But this someone is separate from all the other someones. And that's the fundamental illusion, and it is an illusion. But to confront that illusion is at the heart of the whole thing. And you aren't going to be able to confront that illusion except slowly and with patience and with a great deal of self-compassion. But it is the key, I believe, to recognize the relationship between inside me, because we all think of that there's someone in here, and there's a world out there, and the two are somehow separate. That key relationship, that key understanding that there's a separation, is just fundamental to being a someone. It's who you learned that a human being is. A human being is a someone located somewhere at a particular time, which essentially has you thinking of yourself as a thing, an object. Now, nobody would ever say, oh, I think of myself as an object. But if you think you're a someone located somewhere at a particular time, that's the definition of an object.
Yeah, and not,
I'm getting to relationships.
no, I'm not cutting you off, but I just want to,
Yep.
I want to make sure that the listeners are going to get this.
Right.
Because even in saying that, you are piercing something that is just a default setting.
Exactly.
Most of us listening wake up every day automatically knowing you're already there.
Yeah. And then the question is, who's there?
Yeah.
And then you spend your life working on improving that who. But you might question some of that someone's attributes and try to polish the attributes, but you never question that there's a someone there separate from the world.
Yes.
Nobody ever asks you, well, where exactly is the boundary, please? Is it your
Between
skin?
me and world.
Between me and world.
Right.
Once you start asking those questions, people get uncomfortable and they walk away.
Yes.
And we won't go too far into that right now because we don't have the proper setting. But what I'm trying to point to is that there is this fundamental illusion at the bottom of who you think you are. See, most people, when you say, well, this is about finding out who you really are, not who you think you are, they will think, oh, you mean I have more attributes than I thought I had, or I had different attributes, or I'm not as bad as I fear I am, or it's more like attributes of the someone that I am, rather than questioning the fundamental assumption that there is a someone separate from world.
Yes.
Now, let's go back to what we said before, and I haven't forgotten the question about relationship. Let's go back to what we said before. The world that appears is given by where you're looking from. Well, isn't that interesting? Can you see there's already a different kind of relationship than you thought there was between inside and outside? If where you're looking from is your own history, and your history is giving you the appearing of the world, then there is a relationship between inside and outside that is different, that is not separate.
Yes.
So that's already should make you a little suspicious about that fundamental assumption. Okay, now let's go to relationship.
Yes.
When you allow someone to get really close, intimate, and of course, we don't allow most people to get intimate. We choose that, hopefully judiciously. You allow some people to get close, but not just anybody. Now, when you allow someone to get close, what you're doing is banging up against that illusion, that apparent, as in appearing, separation. You know that I like to use the analogy of being in a relationship is like living with an intimate mirror. And not everybody should be in a relationship. Not everybody should climb Mount Everest. I mean, and a lot of people have apparently, and more so these days, a lot of people are choosing not to be in relationship. You know, there are people in their 50s and 60s still on Tinder. And that's okay. They're just going from one honeymoon period to the next. The honeymoon period is the initial phase of a relationship where you're turned on and it's all wonderful and your beloved can do no wrong and the hormones are flowing.
Mm-hmm.
Dopamine and oxytocin and endorphins, all of those, that cocktail of hormones are giving you a wonderful high. It's called being in love. And I have nothing against being in love. I enjoy it. Every time I've had the opportunity in the past, I loved it. Um, but it has an end. The drugs do wear off. And then the relationship can begin for those who are interested in relationship. Now, if you are interested in relationship, what you're really saying is you're willing to live with an intimate mirror. You're willing to live with somebody who's going to reflect aspects of yourself that you could never see by yourself. You see, if you're at all conscious, you work on yourself, and you work on whatever you are aware of in yourself, whatever you can see. But at a certain point, you can't see any deeper by yourself. You need a mirror. And that's what relationships are. I love what Eckhart Tolle, and I think most of your listeners would know who Eckhart Tolle is, what he said about relationship. He said, most people think relationships are there to make you happy. That's what most people think. They are not, he said. He said, they are there to make you more conscious. Not everybody wants to be more conscious. A lot of people just want to be drugged up and, enjoy being in love.
Well, I think most people would say they want to be more conscious.
Most people would.
But most people, and I can say that because of the conversations that I've had with people. 100% of the people that I speak with will tell me they do want to be more conscious.
Right.
But not everybody knows what that means.
Exactly. That's a good way of saying it.
And what that comes with, because what you're really saying, firstly, you just blew up everybody's romantic fairy tale. Just preparing everybody, if you're having a reaction, who's listening, that the drugs do wear off. And we confuse the drugs with love.
Right.
Or we confuse that with the relationship.
Right.
Right. So what you're saying, and what I have also seen in my own experience, is that when the drugs do wear off, that's when the relationship begins.
Correct. And if you take the relationship seriously, and you're not in the relationship because you expect your partner to make you happy, but rather to be someone that you like and trust and can communicate with and can fight well with. I've discovered the most important aspect of a relationship is finding someone that you argue well together. And arguing well together is not making the other one the enemy, but the sparring partner, the negotiating partner, because the other one is committed to your learning what you need to learn. The relationship is a growth and development program for both parties.
Yes.
The hard part, see, you're going to see things in the mirror, and he's going to see things in the mirror, and you're going to get pissed off at the mirror. Mm-hmm. And the hard part is remembering that it's not yet clear, is this my stuff or is it his stuff? And then working that out, you need someone you like and trust and can communicate with.
Right.
And that's what relationships are about, because the relationship brings you up to banging against that central illusion that I was pointing to, which is as if you are a separate entity from the other. No, it's interactive. The world is occurring given where you're looking from.
Right. Right. So what I'm hearing is, and bear with me as I track this together, back in the 70s, when you were saying that it was harder to have the conversation because less and less people were inquiring in the way they're inquiring now of who they think they are.
That's
so
right.
There was a tightness in our relationship to our consciousness, and
there was a hunger for answers that is far greater than is present in the world today, even though people are looking for answers today, but it was to the exclusion of anything else. Like, tell me what to do.
Yes. but less when you spoke about the summer dress versus a tight sweater. It was like wearing a tight sweater being human. Now,
Yes.
what I hear is that in the openness, maybe that's not the right word, or the deepening of our own consciousness and our inquiry in who we think we are, we're experiencing more of our internal world, or we're becoming more conscious of our internal world.
Right.
So when we get into relationships today, we experience our internal world and the triggers and the activations and the suffering that come from the
Right.
intimate mirror that we have in front of us.
Right.
And we're becoming more conscious of it, but we don't realize that that's the actual point of the
Yes.
relationship.
Exactly.
We
Exactly.
confuse it with there's something wrong with this relationship. Why am I feeling so much anger? Why am I feeling betrayed? Why am I feeling not good enough? Why do I
Right.
feel worse now than I did before I was in the relationship?
Right. And how come he's not making me happy like he did at the start?
Exactly. So we're becoming more conscious of our internal world, but thinking that that internal world and the external world are separate.
Exactly. Now, let's put this in a larger historical context. The discovery of the inner world as we know it today, psychology, psychoanalysis, you could say it begins for the modern world with Freud. That was only 140 years ago, 130, 140 years ago maximum. That's not that long ago. And so, when I say over the last 50 years, I've seen how much more open people are to exploring their inner world. 50 years inside of 120, 30, 40 years, something like that, it's a big piece of it. So it shouldn't be surprising that it's so different today than it was then, because that was just the beginnings of discovering that there is an inner world which impacts our behavior.
Yes. Yes.
Freud's whole insight, and it comes down to one major insight, I think. All of psychoanalysis, I mean, Freud's body of work is very rich, but there's one fundamental insight, and that is he discovered that material, mental, psychological material, when held in the unconscious, can affect our behavior without us realizing why we're doing what we're doing. And when you bring that material from the unconscious to the conscious, it ceases to have that negative impact on our behavior. That's the basic. The transition of psychic material from the unconscious to the conscious.
Right.
So that's the kind of opening bell that introduces the unconscious as an area worthy of inquiry.
Right. And so, really the problem that seems to be occurring in relationships is more the context from which we are coming to the relationship
Yes.
from.
Yes.
It's not about, take me to the happy ending.
Which brings us back to context.
Yes.
You have the power to create a context for your relationship. It's either going to be he's supposed to make me happy, she's supposed to make me happy, in which case you will have a very fraught relationship because there will be times when he doesn't and she doesn't. Or the context of the relationship is growth and development with somebody I love and trust.
Meaning, am I ready to hold an intimate mirror up to myself
Yes,
and show me more of my internal world that I cannot see on my own?
precisely. Now, there's one more very important thing to say about this conversation, and that is there's a huge difference between the in love stage and love. But you got to stick around long enough to get to the love part. There is such a thing as love, and it has nothing to do with falling in love, which is hormonally driven. The in love part comes after a long time of learning to let go into the trust and the deep, profound friendship for another. Everybody's looking for someone to fall in love with. I tell people whenever the issue comes up, look for somebody you really like.
Yes.
Find someone you really like and can talk well with, and you feel you can trust, or there's a possibility of a growing trust. That will take you eventually, if you're on for the ride, to love. But that'll take a long time.
Yes, it brings me back to that teaching. It's like we're not here. This whole inquiry of our internal world and this whole kind of commitment that many people are taking on in their own growth. It's really revealing all the ways that are in the way of love,
Yes,
our
you could say that.
ability to love.
You could say that, yes.
Protections, the because of course when you hold an intimate mirror up to yourself, which is another human being that you're being intimate with and willing to let in close, we as human beings have to face the dilemma of being seen,
Yes,
being
yes,
felt,
yes.
being
And
witnessed in all the ways that we can barely even see in ourselves.
yes, and the contradiction between how we see ourselves when we're alone thinking about ourselves and how we see ourselves in action with another, that contradiction is sometimes unbearable.
Very confronting. And then coming face to face, which most people don't even realize that they have this dilemma of this longing to be seen while simultaneously being seen is their worst nightmare. Longing to be loved, but they cannot let love in, or longing to be, to be held, but they cannot be held. Like the dilemma of what we long for, and
Right.
then also we're protecting and fighting at the same time.
At the basis of every identity is such a dilemma.
Yes.
It's it's the tight grip that holds the identity together. And living with another person that you allow to be your intimate mirror is the only way I know of to begin to loosen the grip of that dilemma and begin to consider the possibility of freeing yourself from it by outgrowing it, not by solving it as a problem, because that dilemma is not a problem. I think it was Jung who once said the most important problems in life, Carl Jung, the most important problems in life cannot be solved. They can only be outgrown.
Yes. And of course, the most important problems in life, if we get very honest with ourselves, because some people would go, "Oh, it's my money, or it's my success, or it's," no, it's the longing to be seen, the longing
Yes,
to be loved, the longing to feel valued.
yes.
Yes,
And to have one's love received. To
yes,
be loved and to love.
yes. To be seen and to be able to see, to be able to be felt while feeling others.
Yes,
Connection, belonging.
that's exactly, yes.
Right. And, if we get really honest with ourselves, which is already hard enough, that is actually at the root of everything that we suffer from.
It's it's the heart of the story.
Yes.
Everybody's story has some dilemma that to be solved.
Hmm.
If I can only solve this, then everything will be fine. And somehow, no matter how many changes you make, it's the same thing in a different form with a different face.
So when you say not everybody should get into a relationship, it's really the invitation of, well, it seems that the greatest transformational program that we could be in is a relationship.
Yes, exactly. And I think that many people, if they knew, number one, that relationship is a growth and development program, and number two, they have the capacity to create a context for being related, which allows that program to be experienced as a developmental program rather than a pendulum swing from everything's wonderful to a horror show.
Right. And the gift of that is the ability to become much more conscious of, or dissolve the illusion of between the internal and the external.
which is the major confrontation, and that's not the beginning of the story. That's really closer to the end of it.
Yeah.
But that's why I call it the chief, the primary illusion, that there's a separation between inside and outside.
Yeah.
But before you can live that, a lot of water needs to flow under the bridge. A lot of experience needs to have happened.
Yes. Now, just the final point as we come to the end of the conversation, this illusion of separateness between inside and outside, which I think you would say is a blind spot of human being, not
Yes.
some. It is the blind spot in our species
Yes.
that we seem to feel this pain, this suffering of the separateness, and we are doing everything we can to solve it, but we don't quite know what's causing it, this
Right.
pain of separateness. I guess my question is how can we as a species begin to be with this in a new way? It's like everything we try to solve doesn't quite get rid of it, and yet it's always there. And it's becoming more, people are becoming more conscious of the suffering that's there. I guess my question is for everyone listening, because they may hear themselves in this, is what is the beginning of shifting your relationship to this separateness, this illusion that the inside is separate from outside?
What is the beginning of that process? Well,
I like people who are listening to this podcast, even though they may not be in the programs themselves, which is really where we need to be in that context to do the deeper work of this. But I like to leave the listeners inquiring.
yeah. Well, I suppose the best place to begin that process, and it's a long process, but the best place to begin it is, and I'm going to say something that is not new, but maybe in the context in which we're speaking now it will be heard differently, with a certain degree of self-compassion. You're not going to do it perfectly. You're going to mess it up again and again. But if you've created for yourself the possibility of being in your own, if you see being a human being as a learning and development program, and it is if you say so, and it isn't if you don't, then you're in a learning process. And here's another distinction. It's the distinction between learning and judging. You're either learning or you're judging. And that begins with yourself. You're either learning about yourself and your relationship to world, or you're judging yourself and as not measuring up because of this or that. So I suppose the place to begin is by allowing yourself to be in a self-created learning program called My Life,
Yes.
without the expectation that you'll do it perfectly every day. Some days there will be breakthroughs, and some days there will be breakdowns, and that's all part of learning. I often like to use the example of a baby learning to walk. The baby keeps falling down a lot because it's learning to use muscles it didn't know it had.
Mhm.
And this kind of being responsible for creating the context for your life is learning to use a muscle you didn't know you had. And so I guess that's the place to begin, twofold. Recognize that you have the possibility of creating the context for your life to appear in, and then your interactions with life will be interacting with the appearing of that life given by where you're looking from, which is the context you created. That's one. And the other part is you're going to fall down a lot.
Yeah.
And if you can do it with a certain degree of humor, it's a lot easier. I laugh at myself all the time. I keep encountering my own humanity all the time. But I've learned to be forgiving because I know what my commitment is. I know that my commitment, which is the context I've created for my life, is one of learning. I'm so damn curious about the whole thing. I just want to figure out where's it going and how am I going to manage it and what's possible for me here and what can I offer there. And I know that I will make mistakes.
Yeah.
And if they're small mistakes, um, I learn from it. If it's big mistakes, I laugh.
Yes. Now, in order to really let in what you are saying, I want to just add one piece. I mean, for the listeners, the level of self-compassion that you speak of, in my experience, becomes more available when where you're looking from in inquiring in yourself is from the context that this is of human being.
Yes,
This is not just you.
that's right.
You are not messed up. It's not because you missed something. You didn't miss the manual. There's no big problem about you. What we are speaking of are blind spots of human being.
Right.
And it is consistent in all human beings.
Yes.
And when you can come from there, which is, of course, the whole invitation of this entire podcast, from there, from that place from which you look at your own internal world and external world, the repetitiveness, the consistencies, that does allow the opportunity of less judgment and more self-compassion. You are part of the species.
Yes. You know, recognizing that you're a member of a species allows you to not take your own humanity so personally.
Yes.
At the same time, it is also true that it does affect you personally. So both are true, and they're both true simultaneously.
Yeah.
You are in an impersonal situation, and it affects you personally. And both are true. And learning to live with that without feeling like it's a contradiction is part of the learning process, I find.
Yes, this is the analogy that you use often. When the rain cloud rains, you do get wet, but the rain cloud is not just following you.
Yes, it is. It's a meteorological phenomenon, not a personal one.
Right. And so, the beginnings is inquiring where in my internal world am I seeing a repetitiveness in my external world? It's a simple confronting inquiry, and if you can begin that way from the context of human being rather than just Nikki, it may allow you to see from a place and in a way that maybe you can't see just when you're looking at your own self as a broken one.
And that's where relationships can be helpful.
Yes, exactly. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation and for your commitment to the context for your life that you have educated so many and myself included. Thank you for teaching me so that I can pass it on to everybody else that I've been speaking to. And yeah, I'm really grateful. It's rare to find people who have committed their life in the way that you have. You're not the only one, but it's rare to find elders who have committed their life and been around long enough to be able to teach us youngsters how things are changing and what you've learned along the way. And it's just very rich, and I find nourishing. So thank you so much for this conversation, David.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, everybody else who's listening, I would say you can find David in all these places, but actually, the way that you will find David is mostly in the programs that we lead here, and through the people that he teaches. One thing that David said to me many years ago is that he will teach me all he can and I'll absorb it and then speak it through my own words. And I'm sure many people that you've worked with, taught, trained, your teachings come through them and speak through them. So thank you so much. Thank you for sharing yourself with our audience and with me. So thank you.
You're welcome.